Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Zumaira D. Makalimbang from Bais 3B. My topic is all about Muslims of the world united, the Ottoman Caliphate under the chapter 4. The Ottoman Caliphate was the last Islamic caliphate of the late medieval and in the early modern era under the Ottoman dynasty of the Ottoman Empire. The demise of the Ottoman Caliphate took place because of a slow erosion of power in relation to Western Europe and because of the end of the Ottoman state and consequences of the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire by the League of Nations mandate. Abdulmajid II, the last Ottoman caliph, held his caliphal position for a couple of years after the partitioning, but with Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's secular reforms and the subsequent exile of the royal Osmanoglu family from the Republic of Turkey in 1924, the caliphal position was abolished. During the period of Ottoman expansion, Ottoman rulers claimed caliphal authority since the conquest of Mamluk Egypt by Selim I in 1517, which bestowed the title of defender of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina upon him and strengthened the Ottoman claim to caliphate in the Muslim world. Okay, so noong 1517, tinalo ng Ottoman Sultan na si Selim I ang Mamluk Sultanate sa Cairo sa naganap na Ottoman Mamluk War. Ang huling kalif ng Cairo na si Al-Mutawakkil III ay dinala pabalik sa Constantinople bilang isang bilanggo. Sinabi doon na formal na isinuko ni Al-Mutawakkil ang titulong kalif pati na rin ang mga panlabas na simbolo nito, which is ang tabak at balabal ni Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Sinuko niya ito kay Sultan Selim I at itinatag ang mga sultan ng Ottoman bilang bagong linya ng kalifal. With most of the Balkans under Ottoman rule by the mid-century, Ottoman territory increased exponentially under Sultan Selim I, who assumed the caliphate in 1517 as the Ottomans turned east and conquered Western Arabia, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Levant, and the other territories. Within the next few decades, much of the North African coast, except Morocco, became part of the Ottoman realm. Ang teritoryo ng Ottoman ay lalong tumaas sa ilalim ng pamamahala ni Sultan Selim I na umangkin sa pagiging caliph noong 1517, habang ang mga Ottoman ay lumiko o pumunta sa silangan at sinakop din nila ang kanlurang Arabia, Egypt, Mesopotamia at Levant at iba pang mga teritoryo. Sa sumunod na ilang dekada, ang karamihan sa baybayin ng Hilagang Aprika ay naging bahagi na rin ng kaharian ng Ottoman. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the Ottoman Empire entered a period of expansion. The empire prospered under the rule of a line of committed and effective sultans. It also flourished economically due to its control of the major overland trade routes between Europe and Asia. Okay, so noong 15th and 16th centuries, Ang Ottoman Empire ay mas lalong lumawak ito at umunlad sa pamamahala ng mga Ottoman Sultans at umusbong din ito sa ekonomiya dahil sa pagkontrol nito sa pangunahing mga overland na ruta ng kalakalan sa pagitan ng Europa at Asia. Strengthened by the Peace of Westphalia and the Industrial Revolution, European powers regrouped and challenged Ottoman dominance, owing largely to poor leadership, archaic political norms, and an inability to keep pace with technological progress in Europe. The Ottoman Empire could not respond effectively to Europe's resurgence and gradually lost its position as a preeminent great power. Ang ginawa ng mga European powers ay muli silang nagtipon at hinamon ang Ottoman Empire. Dahil na rin sa mahirap na pamumuno ng pampolitika ng Ottoman Empire at kawalan din ng kakayahang sumabay sa teknolohikal na pag-unlad sa Europa, ay walang nagawa ang Ottoman Empire sa muling pagkabuhay ng Europa at unti-unti na ring nawala ang posisyon ng Ottoman bilang isang bantog na makapangyarihan. Starting in the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire began to lose its economic and military dominance to Europe. In 1683, the Ottoman Turks were defeated at the Battle of Vienna. This loss added to their already waning status. The first political uses of the title Caliph, however, did not occur until 1774, when the Ottomans needed to counter the Russians, who announced that they needed to protect Orthodox Christians under the Ottoman Empire by making a similar claim about the Muslims living in Russia. The British would tactfully affirm the Ottoman claim to the Caliphate and proceed to have the Ottoman Caliph issue orders to the Muslims living in British India to comply with the British government. Ang unang paggamit ng Ottoman sa titulong Caliph or sa pagiging Caliph or Caliphate ay hindi umabot hanggang 1774 nang kailangan ng mga Ottoman na kontrahin ang mga Russia na inihayag na kailangan nilang protektahan ang mga Kristiyanong Orthodox sa ilalim ng Ottoman Empire. Katulad din ng ginagawa ng mga Ottoman sa mga Muslim na naniniraan sa Russia. Sinuportaan naman ng gobyerno ng Britain ang pananaw ng mga Ottoman na maging Caliph ng Islam sa mga Muslim sa British India. At ang mga Ottoman Sultans ay tumulong sa British sa pamamagitan ng pag-issue sa mga Muslim sa India na suportahan ang pamamahala ng British. Over the next 100 years, the empire began to lose key regions of land. After a revolt, Greece won their independence from the Ottoman Empire in 1830. Ang mga pangunahing rehiyon ng imperyo ay nagsimula nang mawala noong 1830. Nakuha naman ng Greece ang kanilang kalayaan mula sa Ottoman Empire. At the same time, French invaded Ottoman Algeria, which was lost to the empire. Noong 1817, pinilit ng mga taga-Russia si Sultan Abdulhamid II na makipagkasundo sa kanila na iwanan niya yung mga natitirang Ottoman territories sa Europe as a concessions at the eastern end of the Black Sea. But that treaty was then revoked because it was seen as a threat to British and other Western European interests. In 1877 to 78, the Russo-Turkish War ended with a decisive victory for Russia. As a result, Ottoman holdings in Europe declined sharply. Bulgaria was established as an independent principality inside the Ottoman Empire, while Romania achieved full independence and Serbia and Montenegro finally gained complete independence but with smaller territories. In 1878, a scarcely humiliating settlement was dictated by a Congress of European powers meeting in Berlin. British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli advocated for restoring the Ottoman territories on the Balkan Peninsula during the Congress of Berlin, and in return, Britain assumed the administration of Cyprus in 1878. That's why Britain took Cyprus from the Ottoman Empire. And France was given a free hand in Tunisia, which proceeded to occupy in 1881. In the spring of 1881, the French army occupied Tunisia, claiming that Tunisian troops had crossed the border to Algeria. In 1882, Britain occupied Egypt. So in 1882, Britain sent troops to Egypt to put down the Urabi revolt. Kaya nakuha nila yung Egypt. As a result of these losses, in the late 17th and the early 18th century, various Ottoman sultans attempted modernizing reforms to enhance the empire's ability to compete with its European rivals, but each time, conservative elements within the empire, often from within the Janissary army, ended these efforts. These failures were followed by the further defeat in the later 18th century to Russia, Austria, and others, and by the time fighting concluded, the Ottoman Empire had lost all of its European territory north of the Danube River, as well as the Crimean Peninsula and most of its territory on the north shore of the Black Sea to Russia. So, sa kabila ng kanilang pagkatalo in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, sinubukan pa rin ng iba't ibang mga sultan ng Ottoman na gawing makabago ang mga reforma upang mapahusay ang kakayahan ng imperyo na makipagkompetensya sa mga kalaban nito sa Europa. Pero sila ay bigo pa rin. Ang mga kabiguang yon ay sinundan pa ng maraming pagkatalo sa huling bahagi ng 18th century sa Russia, Austria at iba pa, at sa pagtatapos ng labanan, nawala ang imperyo ng Ottoman or the Ottoman Empire at ang lahat ng mga teritoryo nito sa Europa sa hilaga ng Danube River, pati na rin ang Crimean Peninsula at ang karamihan sa teritoryo nito sa hilagang baybayin ng Black Sea. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire initiated a period of modernization known as the Tanzimat, which transformed the nature of the Ottoman state, greatly increasing its power despite the empire's territorial losses. Despite the success of its self-strengthening reforms, the empire was largely unable to match the military strength of its main rival, the Russian Empire, and suffered several defeats in the Russo-Turkish Wars. The Ottoman state defaulted on its loans in 1875 to 76, part of the wider financial crisis affecting much of the globe. So in the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire initiated a period of modernization known as the Tanzimat. Yung makabago na yung na ginawa nila, which is the Tanzimat, ay nagpabago sa estado ng Ottoman. Nalubos na lalong nadagdagan yung kapangyarihan nito sa kabila ng pagkatalo nila sa teritoryo. Pero sa kabila ng kanilang tagumpay sa mga reformang kanilang ginawa, ay hindi pa rin sapat yung kanilang lakas na kalabanin yung kanilang mga kaaway, which is the Russian Empire. At dumanas pa rin sila ng maraming pagkatalo sa Russia-Turkish Wars. During the Balkan Wars, which took place in 1912 and 1913, the Ottoman Empire lost nearly all their territories in Europe. So noong 1912 at 1913, sa panahon ng Balkan Wars, nawala sa Ottoman Empire ang lahat or halos lahat ng kanilang mga teritoryo sa Europa. At the start of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was already in decline. The Ottoman army entered the war in 1914 on the side of the Central Powers, including the Germany and Austria-Hungary, and were defeated in October 1918. Following the armistice of Mudros, most Ottoman territories were divided between Britain, France, Greece, and Russia. Sa pagsisimula pa lang ng World War I, the Ottoman Empire was already in decline. Ang Ottoman ay pumasok sa giyera noong 1914 sa panig ng Central Powers, kabilang ang Alemanya at Austria-Hungary, at natalo din sila noong October 1918. Karamihan sa mga teritoryo ng Ottoman ay nahati sa pagitan ng Britain, France, Greece, at Russia. During the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was one of the world's most expansive empires. By the outbreak of World War I, however, the Ottoman Empire was in a state of rapid transition and decay. During the 19th century, sa kabila ng maraming beses na pagkatalo ng Ottoman Empire in the late 18th century, ang Ottoman Empire ay isa pa rin sa pinakamalawak na imperyo sa buong mundo hanggang sa dumating ang World War I, na yun ang dahilan kaya nawasak ang imperyo ng Ottoman. At tinawag ito na the Sixth Man of Europe. In the second half of the 19th century, Muslims began to take seriously the idea that they should unite to resist the spread of European domination. Muslims in India and Central Asia looked about desperately for Muslim power to which they could appeal for help. They fixed and hoped somewhat pathetically in retrospect on the Sixth Man of Europe, which is the Ottoman Caliphate. Okay, the two Indian brothers, Muhammad Ali Johar and Maulana Shaukat Ali, leaders of the Indian-based Khilafat movement, distributed pamphlets calling upon the Turkish people to preserve the Ottoman Caliphate for the sake of Islam. But with the failure of the Muslim world to find consensus on appointing a successor, the institution of the Caliphate collapsed hanggang sa nabuo ang Republic of Turkey na siyang pumalit sa Ottoman Empire. That's all and thank you.